This week on Snark Squad Pod, we are joined by Matthew Gatos to talk about the Netflix dramedy Glow. Welcome back to Snark Squad Pod. I am Nicole Sweeney.
My name is Marines.
And I am Matthew Gatos, host of the podcast I Love It.
We've asked Matt to join us today because one of the things that he loves is wrestling. And as mentioned, we are talking about the Netflix series Glow. It is a series set in the 1980s in LA about a women's wrestling show. It features an ensemble cast, but I think that our like point of entry, or the character that we really get introduced to the story through is Alison Brie's character. Her name is Ruth Wilder. And at the beginning of the show, she's kind of down on her luck and struggling as an actress living in LA, and she responds to a casting call for unconventional women. And it's a casting call that's put out by the character Sam, played by the comedian Mark Maron, and he's a kind of like washed up director of like strange movies. I don't even know how to describe them, but he's also kind of down on his luck, and he puts out this casting call, and it, along with like a young rich producer, they're trying to put together this women's wrestling show, and they hire these 12 women to go about this, to start learning not only the wrestling but put together these characters. Ruth, at the beginning of the auditioning, isn't doing too great until kind of by accident and partially luck, I don't know, her best friend Debbie charges into the gym and genuinely attacks her after finding out that Ruth slept with her husband. Sam watches all of this go down and gets the idea to cast Debbie as the lead, as the hero of the wrestling show, and Ruth as the villain. So the first season really takes us through them learning the ropes, as it were, of wrestling and putting together their characters in some regards. And then, you know, there's all the character stuff of Ruth coming to terms with what she did and how she betrayed her best friend, and you know, what it has meant for her to struggle in the ways that she has. And there's so many characters that there are a bunch of other subplots, but that's kind of like the main gist of season 1. And then in season 2, we really start focusing in on the stories of the wrestling show, as well as the characters, and then coming to terms with like their characters and the exaggerations that exist there as well. And then also, you know, the show is on like a little TV station in LA, and it's not getting great numbers, and they're going to cancel it. So dealing with all of the drama of just the show existing. And I think that's pretty much it.
So we're going to start where we always start. Matt, did you like this show?
I love this show. It's got everything I'd ever want in a TV show.
Such as?
Mostly wrestling. It has wrestling, which is what I like, so I like this show. But it definitely was one of those things that was on my radar for a long time, because I have liked most of what Genji Kohan has made, and so I heard Genji Kohan, wrestling show, Alison Brie, and I was all in.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't care about wrestling, but like otherwise, just like the basic premise is yes.
I had seen like little promotional things for Glow, mostly while on Netflix watching other things. And what stood out to me was like the women and then the neon. So I thought it was something that was like, you know, 80s or set, whatever. But I legit had no idea what the show was about. So when I started playing the first episode, I was like, wrestling? Like I had no idea where they just, I don't know why that caught me so off guard, but I just didn't know what I was getting into. So it took me about an episode or two to really settle into like, okay, this is what you're watching. But after that, I binged this probably quicker than I've binged anything that we've watched so far. And I absolutely loved it. It took me 2 days to watch both seasons.
Wow.
And it was just a wild ride. I loved it so much.
It's so good. I watched the first season shortly after it was released, and I also watched the first season in a day. I mean, like, it helps that it's 10 half-an-hour episodes, so it's not that much. Like, the time commitment to watch the entire season is basically 5 hours. So, like, it's not a huge, like, time commitment to like as a binging experience, so that helps a lot. But also this almost entirely female cast and all of the like neon colors and whatever, all of that stuff is just like the aesthetic of it was something that I was very here for. And yes, I also like I love this show. Alison Brie was definitely the big draw for me in terms of why I wanted to watch the show. Just, love Community, love her. She's great. I will say, after having seen it, I think Betty Gilpin is like, actually, if I'm gonna like pin who I think like really just showed up above and beyond, I like the things, like the performances that she gives, like the range of sort of hammy soap opera wrestling stuff to the like really just deeply emotional gut wrenching stuff. I was not expecting to love Debbie as much as I did when I started watching the show versus like by the end of it. But yeah, all of these characters are just fantastic. I'm curious if there's anything like that stood out for either of you, like something that really hooked you when you started watching the show beyond just like wrestling. Yeah.
For me, it was the characters, especially because I started watching it mostly for the same reason of Alison Brie. She was the main one I knew going in, and there are like so many like intricacies to so many of these characters, because not only is it like an actress you like, but she's also playing a character, and then that character is also playing a character. And so there's like 3 different like facets to each person. So Betty Gilpin's not someone I was entirely familiar with, but her like role as Debbie and then even as Liberty Bell are 2 things I can strongly get behind, because especially in that second season, she gets to show off so much range.
When I started watching, Nicole is always giving me hints about like how I should be watching in terms of like speed, because 1, she knows I save everything for the last minute. But 2, she also knows, and I struggle like what my things that I enjoy and struggle with in TV are. So she told me to give myself enough time with the first episode because of secondhand embarrassment, right?
Yes, yes. Well, because when I was rewatching it, I messaged you that because I started rewatching it and I actually turned it off. Like going back to rewatch it in the first episode, that moment where Alison Brie's character decides to like put on a performance in the audition with I like only remember all of their wrestling names, but with the Machu Picchu with her, like during their sort of audition, like they have this whole bit about, I stole bread because I like had no money or whatever, and just like rewatching it, like even knowing where we're going, whatever, like that scene, I just turned it off when I first started rewatching it. I got to that part and I was like, I can't handle you right now. So that was when I messaged you to warn you about the secondhand embarrassment.
And I really appreciate it because it prepared me.
There's a lot of that with Ruth. Like, I feel like just with Ruth, because she is so gung-ho and just puts herself completely 110% into each and everything she does. It's hard to imagine being that type of person. So like the fact that she is not embarrassed by what she's doing, and everyone else is kind of laughing at her, we feel very bad for her in those moments. And when actually I kind of admire it at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah, the conviction. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's an earnestness there in some aspects of her personality, which, to like kind of bring it all around, I was appreciative of the warning because it kind of prepared me. But I think the part of what happened when I was like preparing myself, like, okay, you're gonna get really embarrassed by watching this, was that I was almost on my guard against Alison Brie's character. Like, I wasn't sure. She was obviously our point of entry into the story, but I wasn't sure if I was going to be rooting for her or not, because one of the very first things you learned is that she did sleep with her best friend's husband, right? So there's that kind of like immediate like, oh no, girl. And then she was, embarrassing me all over the place. I was very, very confused. But I think one of the things that the show did very, very well was make all of these characters very nuanced. And in terms of like, I kept going back and forth whether I was, rooting for Ruth or if it was Debbie, and the way that they played off of each other, and the fact that at times I thought that Debbie was also in the wrong, and then had, just kind of going back and forth on both of those characters. I really appreciated that dynamic, and I didn't think that I would like Sam, and I'm not sure that he's definitely like not my favorite character, but I expected to dislike him more, and I didn't. So, and the show found ways to make him also just, you could relate to him at times or what he was going through. So I think the show just did very well, giving us things to hold on to for every character and taking us through their highs and lows.
Yes, totally. Matt, I'm curious how the wrestling element of this show read for you. Like, what was the experience like coming at this as somebody? I know literally nothing about wrestling. I didn't even catch the first time. I only caught on second watch that Brooke Hogan has like a weird cameo, random cameo. But like that's like the extent to which I could come at this. Like, oh yeah, you.
Well, and that's one of the few cameos I didn't even notice when I was watching it. Like, there are a bunch of wrestling cameos in this show, but that's not even one I picked up on. I think it shows a pretty accurate portrayal of these characters learning how to wrestle. And I listened to a few different wrestling podcasts, and a lot of the actresses have been guests on those podcasts talking about their experience. And some of them are full on like, oh yeah, I could get in the ring and wrestle a match right now. Like, I know enough to wrestle. And I don't remember his character's name, but he's in the second season. The wrestler, his real name is Chavo Guerrero. He is the one who trained all of them behind the scenes to learn these wrestling moves.
Oh, wow.
And and if you look on the wall in the show, they're wrestling inside of Chavo's gym. And so that's kind of his little... I think it was, hey, if you teach us wrestling moves, we'll put your name in the show every episode. So he's somebody who pops up in the second season. There's like 4 or 5 different other wrestlers who pop up. Most of the men that you see wrestle in the show, that they go to a wrestling match or that come and help them train, or Machu Picchu's family, those are all real wrestlers who have wrestled like professionally on TV. And also Welfare Queen, the character, Kia Stevens is the actress. She was a wrestler.
What?
Yeah. She was a wrestler named Karma, and she also went by Awesome Kong at times. And she wrestled in kind of like the early mid 2000s in like WWE and everything, and quit wrestling because she was going to have a baby. And then now she gets to play a wrestler on TV again.
Oh, man.
That's awesome.
That is amazing. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So for me, the second season was much more exciting because the first season was all of these characters learning how to wrestle and then learning how to make a wrestling show. So you really only get like the last episode is a wrestling show as I know wrestling shows. But in the second season, we get a lot more of that, including an episode I'm sure we have to talk about, which is episode 8, where they just basically put on an episode of the show Glow, and we get to watch a full wrestling show. And yeah, that made, I mean, as much as I enjoy both the seasons, I end up enjoying season 2 a little bit more, I think, because there is more actual wrestling in the show.
I also loved that episode 8, like of the second season. It's fantastic. But I also think that like you need to get all of the setup that we get through in order for an episode like that to really play in the way that it does. I think that you could have done an episode like that in the first season and had it be fun, but like the first season and the first half of the second season did so much work in terms of like giving you the emotional background of all of these people, like their lives outside of the show and how that influences their, experience of being on the show and all of that stuff. That then like there's just this level of just introducing that levity and fun feels earned, I guess. I don't know if that's even the right word for what I'm getting at, but it is much more rewarding at the point in the series that they introduce this episode that is just an episode of the show Glow, which was delightful and charming and good, and I loved it.
Well, it's also a relief.
Yes.
Like, it comes in at a point where we've just had like a pretty horrific moment happen where Betty like breaks I keep missing all the characters.
Yeah.
with their,
Debbie
like, the
Debbie
characters.
breaks Ruth's leg.
Yes, Debbie breaks Ruth's leg in a match, and so there's a lot of obviously like drama between them. There's drama with the other characters because they're trying to figure out what they're going to do for the matches, and then we get this just complete episode of levity where they figured it out. Like she's going to have a twin Russian sister.
I'm curious, kind of on the same question about like how the wrestling is portrayed, and so a lot of it in the first season, I think, is the actresses or the wrestlers who are learning to wrestle or whatnot. They're learning what wrestling is, and especially for Ruth and Debbie, I think they don't get it at first, and so it influences how they're approaching what they're doing and even the way that they see it. Wrestling to me is kind of like country music, and that the people that love it, and everybody else is like, boo, turn it off, like get it away from me. Like it's very extreme. So I think that this, from an outsider's perspective, did a very good job of like showing us what wrestling is and why people enjoy it. And it is the moves and it is all of that, but it's also the storytelling. And it is, and you know, Betty or Debbie has that great moment where she's like, this is a soap opera. I get it. I can do this, you know? And she has that like, you know, realization, and she finally gets to put it all together. So in that aspect, did you think that it represented what wrestling is to you and why you enjoy it, or was it kind of a different experience for you?
No, and actually that it's spot on, because when people ask me about why I like wrestling, I often use the word soap opera and say it's like a soap opera, but with fireworks and a circus mixed in as well. Like, that's what professional wrestling is. And I actually had a few friends text me after they finished watching the first season on Netflix being like, I think I understand why you like wrestling now. And they didn't necessarily get into wrestling watching it after that, but I think they can at least, like you said, understand what I get out of it. And for me, I've been watching wrestling since I can remember anything. I have some of my earliest memories are like going to wrestling matches. So I've always been aware of wrestling, but it wasn't until I was like in high school or something till you start to learn that things are fake and things are planned out, and that all of these people are essentially actors putting on a show, and their goal is never to hurt each other. In fact, their goal is to protect one another and to make sure that nobody gets hurt, but that it looks like they're really getting hurt. So that's kind of how I watch wrestling now, is knowing all of this stuff, knowing why certain decisions are made, and knowing how hard it is for two people to do this sort of show, like sometimes improvised every single week. And so I think watching Glow, I think it was interesting to kind of see that play out in a slower paced, like story-based version, essentially, like getting to see the behind the scenes that everyone kind of knows about who watches wrestling, but it's not front and center. They're not talking about that stuff every week on the show, but you just kind of know about it. So it's kind of nice to get a peek behind the curtain.
Well, and you get to see the motivations of the actual human beings too. So like in addition to all the character stuff that's playing out in the wrestling, like this is also representing the idea of like, yes, but and also like, you know, that they're putting on a performance to do the wrestling, but like, and like why, you know, like what is, I mean, obviously this is super dramatized. It's a fictional TV show, whatever, but like to give these people, I don't know, to give that decision to put on that particular show, this kind of like complexity. And I think this also speaks to something that I love. Mari and I think have both mentioned on the podcast before, but like stories that have this very meta component to them, you know, like a story about telling a story, basically, and like the different ways that people come to how to go about telling a story. And like Mari was saying, the fact that you have sort of your main points of entry in Ruth and Debbie, two people who like looked down on this particular mode of storytelling, come around to realizing what was sort of beautiful and cool and exciting about telling a story in this particular way.
I think something we talked about this when we were talking about Mrs. Maisel. So just like kind of the other aspect of that, of telling a story within a story, is, you know, like writers talking about writing and actors talking about acting. And I think that it was so brilliant to see. The reason that we keep bringing up, I think, Allison Brie and Debbie. I'm mixing every actor and like their character name. Betty Gilpin. So the ways that you could tell when they were actors acting badly, I just think it takes so much skill in order to kind of fluctuate between those things, you know, when they were putting on that affectation and just allowing us to see that. It must be so fun for them to kind of explore that as well as actors, to be like, now I'm acting badly. So I really loved those moments of storytelling within a story, and then that kind of all comes to culmination. And for me, it really was that moment where it was like, after I had seen episode 8 where we actually saw a full like episode of Glow, that was my moment where I was like, I really do get this, because I would watch that show week over week.
My moment like that is honestly the finale of the first season, but it is in part going back to what Matt said about people like texting him and stuff. I watched most of this show with my roommate at the time, a mutual friend of ours, and like Val turned to me at some point like near the end, but while Bash Piz from Veronica Mars is like doing the announcing, like Val turns to me and is like, I bet this would be like Matt's best day ever to be Bash right now. But like it's like that kind of thing too, though, of like seeing how much in contrast, while you have Ruth and Debbie who are like figuring out as you go, you also have Bash who was like, no, this is the best fucking thing ever. And like, you guys, like, I just need you guys to understand how cool and delightful and fun and good this is. And like having his enthusiasm there, I think also helps sell that.
Oh, absolutely. Because that's, especially in the first season, they don't have fans. Like,
right.
They don't, there's nobody else that's excited for them besides like Bash and some of the characters that are wrestling. Like, some of them are still pretty on the fence about it towards the end of the first season. So you need somebody to be that like source of excitement for them. And Bash definitely does that.
I love him.
Yeah.
He's so charming and good.
Had one thing we haven't talked about yet that I was going to ask you guys about is, this is based on a real thing. That there was a show in the 80s, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, that existed. And did either of you know about that before watching the show, or watch any of that ever?
I am aware of the documentary. Netflix keeps trying to make me watch the documentary about that show, which I think the documentary was the inspiration for the Netflix show?
I think so.
But that is like the extent of my knowledge. I don't think that I knew that going when I first, at some point, because like I watched it for the first time right after the show came out, and I don't think that I knew that going into my first watch of the first season.
Gotcha.
I didn't know either. And I watched the whole series again pretty quickly. And then in like looking things up specifically because I wanted to like see if I could get together a synopsis. Don't know how I did, but you know, I tried. I saw a lot of things referring to the series like as based on or Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. And I had this moment where I was going back and forth like, but wait, is this like a thing like outside of the show? So it took me a while to like arrive at the conclusion that yes, this was a thing outside of the show, the Netflix series, but I had no idea going in.
Yeah, it's I will say it's loosely based. Like you can't watch the Netflix original series Glow and know, this is what happened with the real show Glow, because a lot of it has changed. Like none of the people who made it the way that it is. Like it's a very different origin story, but there was a real show very much like the show they end up making in the 80s that actually, I mentioned earlier that Chavo Guerrero was the trainer on this series of Glow. His brother Mondo Guerrero was the trainer on the original series of Glow.
Oh, whoa. That's
so cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And there's like real wrestlers who came out of the old series Glow to go on and wrestle in WWE and all that. So going back and watching like 80s glow is kind of difficult because a lot of the stereotypes and sexism that people call out on the Netflix series was just there in the TV show. And because it's not a drama like we get to see in this, people aren't calling those things out.
It's not examined at any point. It's just, it's just presented.
Yeah. But it's out there. You can find episodes and different skits and stuff on YouTube to check out. And it's probably hard to like figure out where the real glow and the fake glow are in the search results. But just search Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. And also, that documentary is on Netflix.
Which you have to have in order to watch this show. So
so you're already prepared.
This is not sponsored material.
Yeah. I mean, if Netflix wants to sponsor us, like by all means. But you bring up the stereotype stuff, and I think that is like also a thing worth bringing up and discussing in here. I think it is. Like, I'm glad that we're having this conversation about both seasons. I think that the first season doesn't do quite enough, like quite as much as I would have liked in terms of the confronting of those stereotypes, just because it's delivered. There are just so many kind of hand wavy lines from like Sam and Bash just being like, yeah, whatever. Like, yeah, it's a stereotype. We know it is, like, deal with it. And like, because the first season is so much more Ruth and Debbie's story. So I was grateful for the second season just in general, because I feel like the second season took a lot more like time and care with just all of the other characters, basically all of it, like, because once you get out past like Ruth and Debbie, that is where you have all of the not white characters on the show. So like getting to spend more time with their stories and like what it means to like be like welfare queen and whatever.
Oh, that's so heartbreaking.
Yes.
That episode with her son.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. I was just talking to a friend about this too, in preparation. I was thinking a lot about Glow for this podcast and thinking about how episode 1 is a downer of a season in a lot of ways. And one of the things that's really uplifting about season 2 is that so many of these characters are examining themselves. They're examining the characters they're playing, and they're like getting agency over themselves and making changes to their character. Or we even get to see that sort of hand waving that happened in season 1 with Bash and Sam being like, play the part, do your job. We get to see that a little bit at the beginning of season 2, but then we realize why Sam is saying that. And even he starts to come around and realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't just tell them to do their fucking job.
Right.
I was a little bit worried. In my head, I was comparing this to Crazy Ex-Girlfriend in terms of there were a lot of things where I'm like, I was watching like almost so worried, like, oh no, this could go so badly. And I was just prepared for it to go there. And a lot of times it seemed like it just missed being something that was offensive, or I mean, it is offensive. It is offensive purposefully, but I don't know. I think it does a good enough job at times kind of taking these things on, and I think it does a better job in season 2. I think what happened for me was that I wanted it all to be a little bit more explicit. Like we have that episode with Welfare Queen, and her son comes to watch, and she has a very emotional breakdown about what she's doing and what she's portraying. And then they just kind of walk out and happily. And I don't know. I just wanted it to be a little bit more explicit, where she says in so many words what the show is trying to tell you, but that's not the show. It's not, I don't know. There was something that it was trying to convey, but it wasn't confronting head on all of the time. So it plays in a balance, and for some people it's just not going to be enough that it has all of these stereotypes, but for some people you'll be able to see what the show is doing. And I think that something that happens in the first season is like key for understanding everything. But you know, Sam writes this like huge script of what he wants the show to be, and basically, you know, he gets told no, more reductive, less complicated, like basically. And that's where these characters come from, is like, yes, it has to be a stereotype. So understanding that they're doing that purposefully, and then trying to see like how each character owning that is informing their story. But yeah, I don't think that it was maybe as explicit as it needs to be for everyone to enjoy.
Right.
I think they were I'm trying to defend them at all, but I think that it's a hard thing because they were trying to ride that line between this is the way wrestling was done in the 80s. Right. Mm-hmm. It was all stereotypes. Everyone was playing a stereotype. And so we have to be reflective of how it actually was, but we also can't just leave that and not call it out. So they kind of tried to ride a middle line there of, well, we're calling it out, but we're still going to keep doing it and have no one really object too strongly to it.
And you see that happen a couple times, like for Ruth's character Zoya, she spends the whole day with this like Russian family, and she's like, you know, I don't want to misrepresent you guys on TV, like I want to do, and then of course her character is very reductive, like it is a huge stereotype, and then that's like never addressed again. And then I think the other one, Beirut, is the other one that I think you see her have such an emotional reaction to playing a terrorist, as you know, it just goes so badly for her, and it keeps getting worse and worse. Like she tries to change it a few times and she can't, and so things are going not great for her, but it keeps happening. Like she keeps playing that character. Right. So it didn't hinder my enjoyment of the story, and I think there is a lot there to be picked apart, especially because when you're faced with these huge, you know, blatant stereotypes, there is a moment where you can be like, oh, like it shows you something, I think, about the way that people think. But it's a fair warning to say that these things are brought up and sometimes they're addressed, but not super explicitly.
Yeah, that like this is a grievance that people are going to have. That there will be people who will have this grievance with the show, and like it is legitimate. Like it's not like they're not being unreasonable. Like anybody who comes away from the show and feels like I don't think that they dealt with the stereotypes as like completely as they should have. That is a fair criticism, I think, to make of the show. And it is a thing to Matt's point of like, it is definitely a very tricky line to walk. And I don't know, like your mileage may vary on the question of did they do it effectively? Especially because the characters on the wrestling show of it that do get to have control over their characters and do get to change things when they want to are mostly the white characters. Yep. Well, Beirut's plan to get rid of that character was taken over by two white ladies. Exactly. And like Sheila just gets to be herself because she's a wolf. And so it is harder to then see how they're walking that line of giving us one episode where Welfare Queen gets to address it with her son and has the breakdown about it. But it's like, okay, where are the other like characters' moments besides like them just having one line about how they're unhappy about it, or they get to be in a relationship and they're happy that way, so they don't have to worry about their character anymore. Right.
I was going to say too that, you know, one thing that it is nice to see at least that the two black women on the show who are Welfare Queen and then Cherry Bang, at least they had at least the best relationships outside of it. Like, you know, Cherry Bang's happily married and her husband's adorable. I love him so much. He's great. He's the best. And then Welfare Queen has her son and he's in Stanford and they have a really great relationship. So there's stuff that is like propping them up outside of the wrestling. It just is a shame, Matt, like you said, that inside of the ring they seem to have less control over their characters, especially when we keep having these, it keeps being played as emotional notes. So, you know, not only the breakdown when her son is there, but she has that moment where Liberty Bell beats her and then the audience switches and is like on her side and they start chanting for Welfare Queen. And that's a very emotional moment for me too. So they keep having these beats where you're like, oh no, this is sad, but it hasn't quite been dealt with all the way. So I'm excited to see if this keeps getting explored in season 3, but yeah.
I'm so excited. That just happened in real wrestling too, where they pushed a big, like, tall blonde woman character and she got beat up by the quote unquote bad girl, and everyone cheered for the bad girl instead because they were tired and bored of the tall blonde lady. And so I was like, this is like Glow.
Well, it was the taunting at the end, right? She was like, don't you want Welfare Queen to get a job?
Yeah, she went too far.
Yeah, she did. She went too far. Audience abandoned her.
I am very excited. You mentioned like the next season and the whole idea of taking this to Vegas and turning it into just like doing the live show in Las Vegas. I think about all of the things that were so fun about the second season. This is like totally changing the subject, but like all of the over the top stuff that like being able to do sort of more, like Matt said, there's more wrestling in the second season, like taking all of that and setting it in Las Vegas. I am so excited. Like once they revealed it, like that's where we're going. That's how you can save this show. I'm like, yes, good. Gimme it.
Same. Yeah. I am very ready for it. It's weird because it's hard to know where it's going because they didn't necessarily leave a lot of like open plots.
Right.
So it's plot wise, you don't really know what's going to happen next season, but I'm also totally cool with that because like you said, getting to watch this show in a new fun setting, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Mm-hmm. How do you guys feel about the developing relationship between Ruth and Sam, the director?
I hate it.
Yeah. Anytime we see any hint of them being romantic,
yep,
no.
That was like from the jump. Nope.
And there's like multiple times in season 2 where they kind of tease it and then they lean into more of like the father, daughter, big brother, weird uncle type of thing. And you're like, oh, okay, give me that. Please just give me the like familial thing, please. And then they switch it back the other direction and it just
don't.
Because we had like I want to believe that they as characters could have a nice healthy relationship, sure, but it doesn't seem like that is a dynamic that they should explore even with those two characters.
Mm-mm. Anytime you have the sort of the inherent power dynamic issues between like boss and employee, which is like effectively what that's what their dynamic is. That's the hierarchy that exists there. Yeah. That is something that I am inherently uncomfortable with. And like everything about the way these two characters play, like feeds that. Like they're just who they are, who these two characters are as people. I just nothing about this. Like it all just seems like terribly unhealthy and bad. And I don't want it. Well,
it's super manipulative too for their working relationship. Yes. Like he is shitty to her from day one. He punishes her throughout both seasons. And if it's because he's like got a thing for her, that's terrible. But it doesn't even come across that way. It comes across as like he is jealous of her being a better director than him, and he is mad that she's trying to take control when he won't take control.
Right.
And so
he just like exerts power over her periodically because he can. Like just because he
and then
can.
you see this in those like early negative ways at the beginning, but then after you're like, you know, they go to the dance together and he almost leans in that moment that it starts to become very clear to us as an audience that there might be something romantic there. She gets very put off and she sends him all of those signals. And then the next thing he does is almost rewards her, letting her co-direct. And he gives her all of these like little like things that are meant to like entice her back in a way that is very showy of his power and the power dynamic between the two of them. So it was very not great. And I asked because I had a feeling it would be not great for you guys too. And I'm so happy to hear that we are all on team no. No, do not let it happen.
Yeah, no, it's every time it happens, it grosses me out a little bit inside.
Yep. Yeah. Just don't do it. Please don't.
Like she's got a nice man in the second season.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
great. Like, cameraman.
Yeah, they have a fun little relationship going on, and just like let them explore that. Like don't like get involved and try to ruin it for her, and 2, don't like try to. Yeah. I don't like him.
Don't. Absolutely. I feel like it will be such a bad move story-wise to have her cheat on Very Nice Cameraman.
Yes.
Because that's kind of like the low point that started her entire story in season 1. So to have all of the growth that she's had and have her come so far and then have that storyline again because of Sam, I will not. No. I'm with Matt. The noises you just made, yes, all of them. No.
Yeah. It's because then it's just like, what was the point then? What was the point of all of of all the show that we've watched as far as Ruth is concerned? All of the like Ruth arc that we will have seen up to that point, if they decide to go that direction, like becomes pointless. And yeah, don't do it. Don't do it.
Well, I
Dear
feel like
show, don't do it.
I feel like she is kind of their reset button that they use from time to time of like, okay, she's our main character. We need to like make her do something bad or have something bad happen to her so that everyone can come back to her and reset a little bit. And I get that, but I don't want the Sam relationship thing to be a part of that.
I agree.
We've mentioned a lot of like the other wrestlers in terms of like other things that we've talked about, but I'm curious, outside of Liberty Bell and Zoya, if you had some favorites among the cast, not only for their wrestlers or their wrestling characters, but just as characters in and of themselves.
I mean, I feel like there's not anyone I really don't like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I love all of them.
Yeah. Mostly because of the ends of like season 2, the relationship that starts to form between Junk Chain 2 and Beirut.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
like is very sweet and nice and does give us more of their characters, especially one, I don't remember her character's name, but Yolanda has very little character because we just meet her in season 2. It's really nice to see both of them like get some life outside of the show.
Right.
Yeah.
I have sort of a like pretty strong soft spot for both. Machu Picchu, Carmen was her character name, but Carmen and Cherry Bang, in part because they were the ones who sort of took over like teaching people how to do the thing, and and I liked watching that play out, like the sacrifices that they had to make for their own progress in order to like for the good of the group. And I think like that was something that I enjoyed seeing that explored and wish that there would have been more of that. That's definitely a thing that was introduced in both seasons. That both of their characters had moments where like they sacrificed things that would have been good for them to help make everybody else better. And like that was a thing that I would have loved to have seen the show explore more. Also, they introduced the whole like the idea of Carmen and Bash, like kind of teased it in the first season, and then like when you said like at the end of the second season when Bash and Kate
Britannica.
Nash's character get married, like that whole like Carmen's heartbreak. I just my heart, poor sweet Carmen. I don't know. And I liked my feeling about that too is that like when they first started teasing the idea that something might happen between Carmen and Bash, I was so excited about like the idea, just like Carmen getting to have the love story. I wanted that, and then I was sad that we didn't get that.
I loved Carmen too. She's like a ball of sunshine. Yeah. And it's something that they very much bake into her character, I think. She's just the sweetest and the happiest. And when she gets high and she's like giggling all over the place, that was just like a moment of pure joy. And I think another character that I wouldn't be like, I love this character, but she does genuinely make me laugh a lot is Melrose. It just has a lot of like the comedy and is able to be, just because she's like the, brash one, and she just says whatever she's thinking, and so she gets a lot of great moments where I'm like, yeah, you are constipated, hilarious, like whatever it is, she's always doing something weird in the background, and I think it gives us a lot of good moments. I
have that feeling about the they play the old biddies and then they become Nuke and Ozone.
Yeah.
That duo is fantastic. Like they don't have a lot to do, they don't have a lot of story that happens to them, but anytime they pop up, they just have very good moments.
Yes.
Yeah, I also, I love Machu Picchu and the Carmen character. The fact that her costume is the absolute worst wrestling costume. It is a little hat, it is a weird cape, and just a t-shirt and sweatpants.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, like everyone else has a very elaborate costume that is about their character, and she gets a little hat.
Poor Carmen. Carmen deserves better.
Yes.
I love that we got to see them all in full costume and makeup so much more in season 2, because a lot of the costumes just give me joy. Alison Brie's whole thing as Zoya, I don't know, there's just something very visually like appealing about seeing them all in their getup. So that was a lot of fun too. Anytime that they were like costume time, I was like, yes, this is going to be a great episode.
The costumes are just so good. You're just like, I want these costumes. I would like a closet full of these costumes now, please. Thank you. They're so delightful and like ridiculous and great.
Yeah, at times they're almost too good because we're supposed to believe that the one character, Jenny, is making them.
Made all of them. That's true.
And I'm like, okay, like I guess I can believe that, but like we never see her.
She's never sewing.
No, she's just like, oh yeah, I'll make that for you for tomorrow. No problem.
And then she always gives up at Machu Picchu's costume.
Yeah.
Like, nope.
I ran out of time. I'm sorry.
This is like completely changing the subject, but something else that I don't know, enjoyed isn't the right word, but something that I like got a lot out of is the abortion plot that Ruth has in the first season. Two things. First, just seeing this like 80s pregnancy test was a trip. I had never seen this before. Like I didn't know that this was a thing. It's like she had a fucking science lab in that bathroom. I'm very grateful for pee on a stick technology. We've come a long way. Thank you, science, because that looks like hellish and terrible.
Just pull out your chemistry textbook to get ready to take your pregnancy test.
Like you're super stressed out because you maybe like accidentally got pregnant, and like now you also need to learn
a
chemistry.
17-step test. Yeah.
Where's my beaker?
It just seems terrible. But then also the fact that I don't know, just in general, there are. I think we don't see very often in stories for a whole bunch of reasons characters choose to like have an abortion, and like where it's like it clearly makes sense for that character. It reminded me of like Obvious Child for Jenny Slate movie from a couple years ago. That's basically like the thing. That's what happens. And I don't know. So just having that like play out was a thing that I was like grateful for. I don't know, seeing that in this story was like, yeah, like that makes sense. 100%. She should not have a baby. This woman should not have a child. Definitely not the child with her former best friend's ex-husband. Well, definitely not that baby. And I don't know, just like having that there was something that I appreciated.
I think likewise, Ruth's character has this storyline where she has a dinner with one of the TV executives or producers, and she goes and she's super excited at the recognition, and then it becomes very apparent that he's hitting on her and that he wants her to sleep with him. And I was very worried where that scene was going to go, but she ends up just leaving, like getting out of there for her own self and her safety. But then the fallout of all of that I thought was really interesting, and just, you know, the guilt that she later feels, and how Debbie, probably in her anger and especially in her resentment of things that she's gone through in her life and her career, told her you should have slept with him, and then Sam coming on the other end and being like, no, you know, you did the right thing. So kind of seeing how that all played out and just having it be addressed also, like, you know, this is what was expected of her, and, you know, having her not sleep with him and getting out of that situation as quickly as possible. I really appreciated that as well.
Well, and also, like you mentioned, Debbie's role in that storyline too, I think was like like it was painful to watch, but also it was like a very good choice, again, for all the reasons you mentioned, like why, where like Debbie is wrong, but it makes sense like where she's coming from, like on an emotional level, I guess. I don't know, like not she's wrong, but like but just everything about the way that storyline played out, I think felt real and rang true for all of these characters.
Yeah, and it definitely like humanizes Sam a bit more than we get in other parts of the series, especially like end of season 1, he almost makes out with his daughter. So saying that he's on the right side of other issues is nice.
Again, highs and lows for everyone.
Yeah, that's pretty low. I know that Genji Cohan is not as involved with this show as she has been with like Weeds and Orange is the New Black, but does anyone else have like the fear of a prolonged Genji Cohan series in their head?
Of a Weeds or an Orange is the New Black, you mean?
Yeah.
Shows that maybe should have called it sooner than they did. Live long enough to become terrible versions of themselves. Yes.
Precisely.
Why, yes, I do, Matt.
I'm just real worried that Ruth is going to marry the governor of Mexico.
So I've never watched either of those shows, and also where I'm currently in like the high of only having had 2 seasons, and they've been great. So I'm like, what do you mean too long? But well, if anyone starts marrying governors of Mexico, I'm out.
I think that's like season 4 of Weeds, maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
Weeds was one of those shows that, like, I think the reason not only because of Genji Cohan, but because these shows all start off like with a pretty simple premise, and both of the other shows went off the rails eventually in a way that I did not appreciate. And got so big and beyond the original premise that it was just a lot less charming.
Yeah.
And so I do have that fear, but I also know that this is not a created by Genji Cohan show. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe, and I also don't know that I can blame her entirely, obviously, for those other shows.
Sure.
But there's still that fear lingering in the back of my mind of like, okay, if this goes like 5 seasons, what's gonna happen?
You're now giving me second thoughts about my feelings about moving them to Las Vegas, because I think about like Weeds when they left. What the heck was that town called? The community, and went to San Diego. That was like when they went to San Diego. It was sort of like the beginning of the end for that show.
When she burns her house to the ground,
which like you could have ended the show there. Like that could have been your ending, like that. Call it. That is when they should have called it. But anyway, instead she moved to San Diego and marries the governor of Mexico.
This is a show too that has like going off the rails, like baked right into the premise.
Right.
So
it would be so easy to do.
Right.
It's so easy to ruin this. Please don't.
Be careful. On that note, we are going to try not to take this episode of the podcast to the point that it goes off the rails. And we're going to call it. Thank you to Matt for joining us this week, and to all of you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode or you're enjoying the podcast in general, we would really appreciate it if you could rate and review us on iTunes and tell your friends about the show, or consider supporting us on Patreon. We have polls where you can vote on what stuff we're going to cover in the future, and you can get some bonus content, and you can find out about all of that at patreon.com/SnarkSquad. There will be a post up for this episode where you can leave us all of your feelings about Glow at SnarkSquad.com. You can also find us on Twitter at Snark_Squad. I am at Sweeney Says.
You can find me at My Name is Marines.
And you can find me at Matthew Gatos, or my podcast at I Love It Podcast.
Thank you again to Matt for joining us, and thank you to Stefan Chin for the delightful theme music that is playing us out right now. We will be back in your ears again next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.